Hey, what's up guys? Mr. Chris here with Infotainment.com. We are back with our 3rd gen Toyota Tacoma. Today we're doing an exhaust upgrade on our truck, kind of following the line of the TRD Pro intake that we got. We got the TRD exhaust, so we got more air coming in. We're gonna have a little bit more coming out. We're gonna get a deeper, little bit more aggressive tone coming out of that exhaust, as well as a slight maybe a 1% increase in our gas mileage. So if you're interested in getting a little bit of increase on your MPGs, that's a simple way to do it. Let's get into the install. Alright, so starting with the stuff that you're going to need, obviously the exhaust, a jack and jack stands, which is not here because it's actually propping up the truck right now. Also some tire stops if you don't have any, maybe a piece of wood, couple pieces of wood to stop the front tires from rolling. We have some gloves here, some eye protection just in case you have some rusty bolts that you got to pull out. Because I'm doing the install on epoxied floors, I'm just going to use a furniture mat, but if you have a creeper, or something to lay on. Cardboard is also a pretty good alternative if you don't want to lay on the ground. You don't need a lot of tools. You just need a 14mm socket and wrench and a pry bar. I'm going to use a 14mm impact to get my bolts out, and some penetrating oil, WD-40, PB Blast, anything to kind of pre-soak those exhaust bolts. Usually they're rusty, usually they don't want to come out. You could use the WD-40 for the exhaust hangers. There's these rubber hangers that hang on to these little hanging tabs here, these rods of metal, and usually they're really dry and really stuck and they don't like to slide off. So I like to use 303. You can use anything. I like to use 303 because it doesn't make as much of a mess, but it lubes up the rod enough so you can slide that rubber grommet off. Obviously a rag, and if you need a light underneath there, make sure to grab one before you get up underneath there. As far as the exhaust goes, it comes pretty well wrapped. It comes in a big box. I suggest before anything you take it all out of the box, take all the wrapping off, all the bubble wrap, and make sure that it's in good condition. A lot of times these can get beat up during the shipping process, especially the exhaust tip. This has a nice black gloss tip here, and sometimes those can be kind of beat up. They do wrap it pretty good, but it's always better to be safe and unwrap it right away. With that bubble wrap that they sent, after I checked it, I'm gonna rewrap the tip here and throw some painter's tape on there to kind of protect that as I position it underneath the truck. Just because this is a one-piece exhaust, you kind of gotta fish it over the axle. This is the hump that will actually rest above the axle, so in fishing it in there, you can kind of jack that tip up. So having that protected is in your best interest. But yeah, besides that, we'll get up underneath the truck and start the install. Alright, so on the side of our truck here, you can see I removed the right rear tire. That's just so you can get a better view of what we're doing. You do not have to remove your tire to install the exhaust. Basically, the way I like to support the vehicle when I'm doing any kind of exhaust is I like to jack it up from the rear axle, put a couple stands underneath the frame, and then lower the axle. So by hanging the axle back there, that's allowing me to have the max amount of room in between the axle and the truck, especially on one-piece exhaust like this, so I can fit the exhaust out with no problem. I see a lot of people using the ramps. They just drive their truck up on a ramp, and while that elevates the truck, that keeps all the rear of the truck on that rear tire, so it keeps this space very small. So if you're trying to pull your exhaust out of there, you're going to be fighting it a lot more because you're going to have just that much less room to work with. So by doing this just opens up that whole area there, and it should be a pretty doable job all by yourself. Alright, so once the truck is properly supported, from up underneath the truck here, this middle joint right behind the Y-pipe here is where you're going to need to remove these two 14mm bolts that are going through the front. On the other side, there's a welded nut, so you don't have to hold the other side with a wrench or anything unless the welds break, but it should be good. But from here, I already pre-soaked these actually yesterday, so it's been sitting for over 24 hours. But I sprayed both sides of the bolt and the welded nut because it was pretty bad with rust, and you can actually see the rust coming off of ours. If you need to, if your bolts are really stuck, I would break them free with either a breaker bar or just a large ratchet before you use an impact. If yours are severely rusted and you go ahead and use an impact, it may be so stuck that your impact socket will just round the bolt out. But basically, you're gonna come in here, and I'm not gonna take that off all the way. So from here, we know that we're not gonna have a problem here. These are able to be removed. Sometimes these are so seized up, you have to cut them off. This is why I like to start here. But because ours moved, everything is nice and free. Now we can go ahead and work our way to the rubber grommets, remove everything else, and then we'll come back here afterwards and just take it off the rest of the way. All right, now that we got our exhaust bolts removed, the rubber exhaust hangers are basically where we're gonna move to next. And this is where I grab some 303, not sponsored. And I'll just spray that rubber on both sides here. Get that nice and wet, and we'll do that to all of our grommets. But basically, what you're trying to do is wedge your pry bar in so you can pull the grommet or the exhaust hanger off. There you go. All right, now that we got this popped off, this is basically what you want to do for the rest of your rubber hangers. There's one more on the inside of the muffler. There's another one on the front side, and we're going to remove all three of those, leaving the one closest to the tailpipe still attached. And we'll go ahead and remove the two nuts that we loosened up earlier, or all we'll have left is that last grommet towards the tailpipe holding kind of the whole assembly up. So let's do that now. All right, and if yours pops off on the top side instead of the bottom, doesn't really matter as long as you put it back where it was. It really doesn't make a difference which side pops off. All right, we'll get to the one on the front side of the muffler. All right, we'll do the same thing on this third one at the front side of the muffler here. There we go. All right, now that that's off, we can remove these two bolts that are attached to our Y pipe that we loosened earlier. All right, that one's out, pretty rusty. All right, and we'll rest the exhaust on the ground. All we got holding it up is that rear tailpipe exhaust hanger. We'll just go back there, remove that, and we can slide this exhaust out of the truck. All right, and this is that exhaust gasket that I was talking about earlier. It can get kind of hung up on this lip here. You're just pulling it back, so it just clears that lip there. But also, when you pull this off, depending on the age of your truck, you can actually see if this thing is in good condition still. If not, maybe you can get a new gasket for it. But ours is in good shape, so let's move on to the rear. All right, so we'll just finish up putting some lube on there. Make sure you support that tailpipe. Keep it from spinning. There you go. Our exhaust is free. All right, so with our exhaust completely removed, we're gonna continue to support it so it doesn't drop down on the axle here. And the only reason it has a ABS line and a brake line back on that axle. Now, if you were to rest it and you were gentle, it's not gonna damage anything, but we just like to keep it off of that axle. With this same kind of sweeping, swinging motion, we can spin it upwards and push forward. and we'll be able to get the whole exhaust out of here. Just like that. And basically, we're gonna grab the new exhaust and we're gonna fish it in the same way we pulled this one out. All right, we'll pull this out of here and grab our new exhaust. All right, setting the exhaust back under the truck in the same orientation that we pulled the other one out in. We're basically gonna take the tailpipe and spin that hump back up towards the driver's side, the passenger side rather. All right, we'll fish it over the axle, kind of spinning it around as we work it here. All right, and basically we're gonna hang our exhaust hanger back up here, and it may need a little bit more lube to help push it in. There we go. That popped right into place. All right, now we can go back to those 14mm bolts and put those back on. All right, coming back up to the front here, you can just pick up your exhaust. And this one is heavier than the factory one that we just removed. So keep that in mind. You'll definitely need some strong shoulders when doing this by yourself. But basically you can just hang this over your factory seal and put the bolts back in. Now, if you have anti-seize on hand, this would be a good time to put some anti-seize on these bolts and put that in there. So if you do plan to remove anything in the future, these bolts aren't seized up on you. All right, now we can go ahead and reinstall all of our remaining exhaust hangers and we'll be done. All right, now we can take her off of the jack stands and give her a test start. All right, let's go ahead and remove this bubble wrap. Make sure we didn't damage our tailpipe. All right, and that wraps up the TRD Pro exhaust install. Just like that, you got more aggressive tip, more aggressive sound, and hopefully a little bit better gas mileage as long as you can keep off with the gas. Not too bad of an install. Probably give yourself about an hour, hour and a half. Definitely doable by yourself. If you don't feel comfortable, get yourself a friend. It's always better to have a partner there to help you hold up the exhaust if needed. But for installs like this and more, come back to Infotainment.com.